What manufacturers need to know about Industry 4.0, the new AI startup that's gunning for Workday, Oracle, and SAP, and what you must know before choosing a new ERP system. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 265 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control is a major song.
Hello, and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. This is the tech-agnostic view of the world of digital transformation. We feature new episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including software selection, planning, and implementation. And my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. So thanks for being here today. And joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited for another episode.
Yes, this will be fun. There's a lot of cool stuff. I'm really excited for some of the newsworthy topics and our guests that we're going to have today. But before we get to that, we're going to get into some social media questions to start the episode. We'll get into a discussion around an AI startup that's focused on going after Workday, Oracle, and SAP. And we'll also talk about how AlixPartners predicts that AI will trigger a $500 billion collapse. So that's the bad news that we're going to talk about here today. And then later in the show, we'll have Jeff Winter on the show, who's an Industry 4.0 and manufacturing thought leader in the space. He's one of the best known manufacturing and Industry 4.0 guys that are out there. He's going to be on the show. We're going to talk about what manufacturers need to know about Industry 4.0. And then later, after Jeff's on the show, we'll also talk about what you must know before choosing a new ERP system. So before we jump into our guests and all the other stuff we're going to get to, though, Darian, what are some of the questions we've received here recently on social media?
Yeah, a couple of good questions here today. Starting with one, Eric, obviously, one thing that you said recently on LinkedIn was the most common reason organizations give for evaluating for ERP is because our vendor is discontinuing our old software. And with that, the question that we got is, if the vendor is really sunsetting your system, what choice do you actually have? Is it realistic to expect leadership to define transformational business objectives when they're held hostage?
That's a good question. And a lot of companies are held hostage, or they feel like they're being held hostage. And I'd say, I'd give you a two-part answer, and I'd summarize it by saying it's not fair, but I mean, it's not fair to expect it, but I would still expect an organization to come up with a better strategy than just we are being held hostage and we have to upgrade. That's a reason, but it's not a good reason to make the move. I think if you don't have any clarity beyond that, you just aren't going to have the direction and the focus that the project needs to be successful. And that's why so many failures are happening right now. Failures have always been a problem in this industry, but the failure rate is actually increasing for ERP and digital transformation projects, largely because so many organizations are just doing this because they feel like they have to. And that's, I hate to say it, but it's a terrible reason to do it. And so I think even if that is true, and that's the big driver, that's what's maybe pushing you over the edge to now want to embark on a digital transformation, I would still implore leaders out there to develop a better set of purposes and goals and objectives and strategies for the project beyond just we have to replace the system because it's old and our vendor is making us. So that's one thing. The second thing I'd say is you also have to look at what is the risk reward. I mean, there is a risk that your vendor cuts off support, but are there ways you could mitigate that risk without necessarily having to go through a full transformation? And how would that compare to the risk reward of doing the full transformation? And so, for example, you may say, what if I just go out and get third-party support? Is there someone that could provide third-party support to give me some additional runway, some additional useful life out of the software? So if you're using SAP or if you're using any of the legacy Oracle products, for example, there are third-party support providers out there that can help give you some runway for another decade potentially on that software to at least buy you some time and help you get more value out of the systems you already have. The last thing I'd say is, let's just say there's not third-party support out there for your solution, and you are being held hostage. You're being told that maintenance is going to discontinue within the next couple of years. Well, then you have to look at, okay, that is a risk. If a vendor won't support the product anymore, that's a risk. But is that risk as significant as the risk of going through a transformation? And for a lot of companies, they'll say, no, actually, that is a risk, but it's a lower risk than going through a transformation, because transformation projects have an abnormally high failure rate and an abnormally low chance of succeeding. Whereas the system you're on that's already working, if it's working, then you know with 100% certainty that it is working. Maybe not as ideal as you want it to be. And I'm sure you can optimize it and get more value out of it, which may be another path as well. But you have to be able to look at that and say, is that the worst case? Is that the worst thing in the world if we stay on this old system and we no longer have support? Maybe there's other ways we mitigate that risk. So I think you just have to be objective about it and look rationally at it and not get too caught up in the whole technical purity of you need to be future proof. You need to be on the bleeding edge. You need to get rid of technical debt. That's all just marketing speak that's manufactured by the technology industry. You have to look inward at yourself and say, what makes the most sense for us? How does it compare to other priorities we have as an organization as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question there from the first person today, but I want to get to our second question today, which is, Eric, in your experience, does best of breed actually deliver on its promise, or does the integration complexity eat the flexibility gains alive?
I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask the technologists that are out there, the IT types, I think they'd say the complexity is larger than the benefit of the flexibility. And that makes sense from a technical perspective. And it's probably true in most cases from a technical perspective. It's a lot easier to manage a single system in a perfect world if you can, rather than trying to patch together 5 or 7 different systems or whatever the number is. The problem, though, is that technology isn't, and it shouldn't be, driving most business decisions. It's an input, so it is a consideration. But if the business at the end of the day determines that flexibility is worth the additional pressure and cost and complexity we're adding to our IT department, that may be a valid, rational decision. That is a valid and rational decision in those cases. Now, it's interesting because I've been trying to spark debate online about this topic, because I have such a mixed audience of business leaders as well as technology leaders that follow me. And it's interesting to hear both sides, because they both have pretty strong opinions. And a lot of technologists out there will say, Eric, you're full of it. You're full of crap. It's too complex. That business shouldn't be making these decisions. Technologists should be. And then business leaders are saying the opposite. I'd love to hear the comments from the audience here listening today too. What are your thoughts on this whole thing? Because I think I talk a lot about how companies have to deal with all these different risks, like dealing with their vendors and system integrators that have conflicts of interest and things that might lead them astray or off track or down a biased path. But what I haven't talked a lot about until more recently is the internal conflict that organizations have, the internal biases that organizations have within their own 4 walls. And business and IT, there's always a tension there. And it's in most cases a healthy tension. I think you need it, but it's at the end of the day, leadership has to decide what's more important and which direction we want to go. And then how are we going to mitigate whatever risk we accept? Because no matter what you do, there's going to be a risk. You're either going to have technical complexity or you're going to have business inflexibility. And so someone's got to make that decision and make sure everyone's aligned with that, knowing that there's no perfect answer. So that'd be my thought there.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting there. But I want to get into our newsworthy articles of the day. We have some different interesting ones today that I found very interesting, at least. This first one, though, is about the French AI startup kind of gunning for Workday, Oracle, and SAP. So Pigment, a Paris-based AI native planning platform, is approaching 100 million ARR after doubling revenue for 3 consecutive years. The company's new modular agent lets users describe what they want in natural language and generates governed production-ready planning applications, collapsing build times from weeks to minutes. With customers like Uber, Anthropic, and Siemens, and more than half of the new customers are migrating from SaaS incumbents, Pigment is positioning itself as a direct alternative to SAP, Oracle, and Workday for enterprise planning. So why does this actually matter? Pigment's trajectory signals a real shift in enterprise planning software. The company grew its enterprise customer base from 74% in the past year And more than half of its new customers migrated directly from legacy SaaS giants, backed by nearly 400 million in funding and 1 billion, and it has a $1 billion evaluation plus, which is obviously huge. Pigment has a capital to compete at scale. Its modular agent represents a new model for enterprise software, one where AI agents generate applications on demand rather than requiring months of configuration and consulting. Figma reported reaching 80% of what they wanted to build from a blank page in minutes. If this pattern scales, it threatens the entire implementation services ecosystem that surrounds traditional ERP and planning tools. So I found that super interesting, but I want to get, Eric, your take on it. So if Pigment can collapse build times from weeks to minutes, what happens to the massive ecosystems built around SAP, Oracle, and Workday implementations?
That's super interesting. I'm not aware, or I wasn't aware of this startup until you just talked about it. So a couple things. One is you mentioned a number that really jumped out, which is $100 million of annual recurring revenue. That's not a small number, especially for a startup. That's a big number. Just by way of comparison, there's companies like Epicor, for example, that's just getting to the point where they're crossing that threshold, $1 billion plus of annual recurring revenue. So for a startup to already have 100 million, that's a big deal, because Epicor, for example, has been around for 20 or 30 years, and they're just now reaching $1 billion. So these guys are onto something, clearly, if they've already hit that number. And by the way, annual recurring revenue is what investors look at. They look at, what is that subscription predictable revenue going to be, and they like it because it's so predictable. It's a cash cow, and they know it's going to lead to future profits. And so that's an impressive number. But I think, to your point, or to your question, your broader question around what this means to the industry, I think it's a really big deal. And I think it's examples like this that are going to chip away at the commercial off-the-shelf cloud ERP market. And it's not going to happen overnight, but you can see it happening. Like, this is just one example of many, where here's another option you have in it beyond just your monolithic ERP systems that are, by the way, trying to move everyone to a forced adoption of vanilla cloud basic standard processes, because that's the cloud ERP model. This is the opposite. This is saying, forget that. Forget off-the-shelf standard software that everyone has to comply to, or worse yet, try to figure out how to force that into your business and jam it down the throats of the business and have the business resist it. Now we've got a platform we can use to create software that is specific to us, and it reduces the barriers to entry. It reduces the need for these big system integrators. It reduces the needs for the big, expensive software vendors. So I think short term, though, to your question, vendors, system integrators, and the overall ecosystem, you think about SAP, Workday, Oracle, all these big, massive ecosystems with billions and billions of dollars at stake, they will heavily resist this. And they'll talk about how terrible it is, what a terrible idea it is. Why would you do that? You have all this technical debt you've got to manage yourself now because it's all customized, and it's, no one's there to support you. And, there'll be a lot of fear factoring that goes into it. But I think long term, it's inevitable that the mighty are going to fall in this industry. I just don't see how it could possibly survive. They will try, and they'll extend it as long as they can, and it'll be a nice ride. They'll probably give another 5 or 7 years maybe of glory days ahead of them. But those glory days are ending, I think, for the big ERP vendors. And I think this is just one of many early warning signs that SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Dynamics, Workday, maybe less so Salesforce, just because they have so many different apps and platform. They have an overall platform that they've built. But let's just pick on Workday, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, all the big monolithic ERP providers. I think their glory days are, most of them are behind them at this point. And there's a change coming in the industry for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that stood out to me in this article is when Figma got quoted that they mentioned they got 80% of what they wanted within minutes, essentially. What about that last 20%? Is that where enterprise complexity lives, or what do you think about that last 20?
Well, I think that last 20 is where, that's where the differentiators are. That's where your competitive advantages are. That's where you start to build some barriers to entry for your competition, to make it harder for your competition to replicate. So that's why I like this so much, what they're talking about, because the 80% that's, let's call it not non-value add, but non-competitive building, it's not your competitive advantage. Why spend a lot of time and money implementing a really complex cloud ERP system when you could just go build something that automatically does what you need it to do, exactly how you need it to do? And then you can really focus on fine tuning that last 20%. So I think it's, one thing I struggle with the current wave of migrations to the cloud is that so many companies are doing so with this carrot that's way out on the horizon that says, if I could just make it through this big 10 or $20 million project over the next 2 to 3 years to replace what I already have, by the way, I'm just replacing GL, financials, inventory management, warehouse management, all the basic stuff I already had in my legacy system. I'm going to spend millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to replace that, to move to the cloud, to be on the latest and greatest. And then maybe, just maybe someday, if that goes well and I can stabilize that, then I could get to AI, then I could get to predictive analytics and all the cool stuff that's being built in the cloud. And so that's the problem I have with this industry is it's almost like you're holding this carrot out here that you will get all this great AI stuff, but you have to migrate to the current to a new version of the system. And so that's why I'm a big fan of ways to shortcut that and say, why would you throw that barrier up there? Why not get immediate value and find ways to leverage what you've got, or at the very least, build things faster and cheaper and better than what a big tech vendor is going to provide to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I found it super interesting, that article, but it kind of leads us into our next one, which is from AlixPartners and how they predict AI will trigger a $5 billion collapse in enterprise software. So I found this article obviously interesting just from that tagline. But what it said was AlixPartners is predicting AI will put up to $500 billion in enterprise software revenue at risk as AI agents replace or subsume entire categories of tools that knowledge workers currently rely on. For example, the consulting firm expects that M&A activity in the software industry will surge from 30 to 40% year over year, reaching an estimated $600 billion in 2026, as AI disruption forces mid-market software companies to merge, get acquired, or exit. This isn't a startup making a bold claim, obviously. This is AlixPartners, so not just some random company. But their prediction that a $500 billion in enterprise revenue risk represents a fundamental repricing of the entire industry. The report highlights that over 80% of enterprises are expected to deploy generative AI capabilities via APIs or embedded tools by the end of 2026. For ERP users, the shift eliminates the need for human intermediation in data analysis and pattern recognition. Users interact with business data through natural language queries. The report also introduces the concept of trust as a product, identity, privacy, safety, audit, and interoperability capabilities that will become table stakes for enterprise AI adoption. The last thing I want to mention with this article is the enterprise software industry is entering a period of consolidation and repricing driven by AI, with the mid-market vendors at the most risk, and M&A expected to be the primary mechanisms for the industry to restructure itself around AI native capabilities. So, Eric, with this, if M&A surges to $600 billion in 2026, who are the buyers and who are the targets? Are SAP and Oracle on a shopping spree, or are there new players rolling up in the mid-market, in your opinion?
That's a great question. And I don't know. I mean, I could see either one happening, honestly. I mean, I could see on one hand, these startups or these upstart types of companies doing really well, getting high valuations and just going public and raising money and capital that way versus necessarily selling. But I think for SAP, for example, SAP and maybe even Oracle, maybe Microsoft might be okay just because they've already built so much in terms of AI and Power Apps and other things that aren't so dependent on monolithic ERP systems. They've got all the other stuff that they do, so they're probably not in as much risk or trouble as SAP and maybe Oracle and maybe even Infor and Epicor too, as you move down the chain of other ERP providers, Workday as well. So I could see those being appealing acquisition targets as these companies realize, assuming they do realize and start to recognize that our business model is at stake and it's in jeopardy here. And the only way we could either resist it, to your earlier point in the podcast about, do we resist it and try to protect our turf, or do we embrace it and say this is happening either way, so let's be part of it, let's go acquire a company? Or what I think is probably more likely, though, is I think they're probably more likely to try and build something like that themselves, but I think they'll probably respond too slowly if I had to predict what'll happen. I think SAP in particular is just such a big, massive incumbent organization with just enough hubris and arrogance that I think they're going to miss the whole thing. And what I mean by that is I don't think they're humble enough to realize our business model is broken and flawed and it's not going to last. I don't think they are humble enough to recognize that, to then go to realize the need to potentially go buy a system or a solution that might help them move to the next phase of this journey or this progression of the industry. And I think that's why, I posted on social media how I think SAP in years to come will end up falling by the wayside of like the old technology companies that used to be, back in the glory days, like the Commodore 64, Blockbuster Video, these companies that were big, massive behemoths, and they just totally missed the mark on where the industry was going. I see that happening with SAP right now. Maybe they get a new CEO or a new leadership team that totally changes, or maybe they wake up one day and just say, we're missing out. Let's go do something about it. But I don't see any signs that they're willing to do that. I see them doubling down on S/4HANA. They're doubling down on Joule. They're doubling down on their own monolithic, old school way of thinking. And I think they will miss out. And it won't just be SAP. Others are going to miss out too. But I think some of the smaller ones are more likely to get acquired and probably get a lifeline that way. But SAP is the one where I think they're the most at risk, just because they're the biggest one and probably the slowest to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And one question I have that goes with this is, if AI agents are really replacing, like it says, entire categories of tools that knowledge workers really rely on, does the traditional ERP evaluation process really make sense, or will that change too?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've been preparing for the potential demise of our software selection services, not because we don't want to do it anymore, but because we just assume that over time the industry may not need it, especially with AI tools out there that allow you to fast track and do a lot of the research yourself. The irony, though, is ever since I've been vocal internally within our company about how software selection probably is going to go away, so we better get used to doing other stuff, because that's not going to be that used to be, historically, that was our traditional entry point for clients, is they would say, hey, we need new ERP systems, so let's hire Third Stage. And then Third Stage helps them select software, and then we end up getting the bigger project to help them implement, doing the PMO and the change management, all that stuff that we do. Still our business model, but I've been preparing the team, like, don't plan on software selections feeding that business in the future. We've got to figure out how to go find it outside of software selection engagements. But since I've started saying that, the irony is we've actually started getting this huge influx of software selection business, which is weird because I wasn't expecting it, but also because what I'm realizing is there's so many options now that I think companies are getting confused, that they have all these different directions they can go, that it's almost more overwhelming now than it's ever been. So they need more selection help. So I didn't see that coming, but that seems to be what's happening, at least right now in our world at Third Stage Consulting. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to software selection. If you would ask me this a year or two ago, I would have said it's probably going to go away completely. But now I'm second guessing that because we're seeing the opposite. So I do still think it might go away eventually, especially as companies get more savvy and realize that they can take more control and ownership, to where they focus more on, let's not go do this long drawn out expanded search for software off the shelf when maybe we build it ourselves, or maybe we take more of an incremental approach rather than a big massive ERP implementation. I mean, there's just so many different directions companies may go. So your guess is as good as mine, but I have very conflicting opinions on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting topics today, but I am excited to get into our conversation about Industry 4.0.
Yeah, it's a topic we covered a few weeks ago, and I did a general high-level discussion around Industry 4.0, so this will be a nice follow-up to that, to where now we actually have a guest who specializes in this area that's going to be with us. His name is Jeff Winters. He's a very well-known thought leader in the manufacturing and Industry 4.0 space. We're going to have him on the show. And then later in the show, we're also going to talk about the things you need to know about selecting ERP software. And speaking of which, you were just asking me about that. So we're going to cover that as well later in the show. So be sure to stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 265. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And this is the podcast that covers everything related to digital strategy, people, process, and technology. And it's a tech agnostic view of the world of digital transformation. So I appreciate you being here today. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Production. So if you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help your organization with its digital transformation initiatives, you can reach out to me, and you can also reach out to Major Tom if you'd like to learn more about how to sponsor this podcast and other content that we create. So you can find the contact information for Major Tom below as well. So I'm excited for our next guest. This next guest that we're going to have on the show is going to be here to talk about Industry 4.0 and manufacturing transformations in general. This is a guest that has close to 100 million views on LinkedIn. He's been named the number one influencer in both manufacturing and Industry 4.0 by Analytica and other outlets. Very well-known guy. It's how I learned about him, was through following him on LinkedIn. It's Jeff Winters. So he's been around for a long time in this space and excited to have him on the show. So Jeff, thanks for being here today.
And I'm excited we finally made this work too. I know we've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I think we had some fits and starts, scheduling issues, all kinds of stuff between you and I. It was just a pain getting us together, but we finally did it. Finally happened. I'm excited to share the discussion here with the audience. So before we have you introduce yourself now and kind of what your role is and what your thoughts are about Industry 4.0, just tell us a little bit about yourself, like your upbringing in the space. How'd you get into manufacturing? Where did you get started? How did it evolve? Tell us your career story, if you don't mind, in a few seconds.
Sure. I guess a little over 20 years in the industry, kind of grew up in technology, graduated electrical engineering technology, but immediately went into sales because I like dealing with lots of different people, working with lots of different environments. I've been in manufacturing my whole career, just to kind of state that. But what I've done is different parts of in the manufacturing process. I worked for hardware manufacturers, helping with equipment. Then I moved to system integrators, helping with doing projects and transformations. Then I worked for software companies. And so I've had a wide variety of exposure all to the same industry from different lenses. Plus I've had different roles. I'd say most of my career has been in sales. Then I went into marketing and realized I have a better skill and passion for communicating to many rather than one-to-one. Then I learned I really like strategy and found out after I earned my MBA, it's its own field, and there's education and frameworks and models behind it. And so I've kind of been in strategy ever since, and it's usually strategy related to competitive advantage and go to market and kind of commercial strategy that I've been focusing on, and that's kind of where I'm at now. So there, about a minute.
Yeah. And what do you do now? Tell us about your role now, and tell us about Belden, where you're working now.
Yeah, so I'm about 4 weeks into a new role with Belden, and my title is Vice President of Commercial Strategy. And I was brought in because they're a 123-ish year old company that's kind of grown up making cable, wires, connectors, that sort of stuff. That's what they're kind of known for. They've expanded since then, have a pretty large portfolio. But when you're over 100 years old, it takes a lot to change a brand and the perception in the industry and who we want to be. And part of what I'm here is to help with that, to kind of transition the brand from a cable and wire manufacturer to a data solution provider and someone that can help with advancements in digital transformation and Industry 4.0. And I think they have a lot of the right pieces in place. It's going to be putting them all together and communicating that to the world.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's interesting to hear that you have this interesting background that spans across not just manufacturing but strategy, marketing, sales, all within the manufacturing space. So I'm sure you have a unique perspective that most of us don't have. So I'm really excited to dig into it here. Before I do, I just want to turn to the audience real quick and say hello to some audience members that have chimed in. Darian's joining on LinkedIn. Hello, good morning, Darian. Kaven joining from Montreal, Canada on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here today. Emma Roloff joining from LinkedIn from Madison. That's someone I think you know too, Jeff.
I just spoke with her a couple weeks ago.
Did you? Nice.
Yeah, on stage.
She's that's at the Industry 4.0 conference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Tomer joining on LinkedIn from Illinois, and then Mario joining from Winnipeg, Canada, and then Michael's joining on LinkedIn from Germany. So a lot of people joining from LinkedIn here today, which makes sense because you have such a huge following on LinkedIn. But if you're joining on YouTube or anywhere else, let us know. I'd love to hear where you're joining from too. And then Cassiana just commented here on LinkedIn as well, joining from Romania. So thank you for being here today. So I guess just to start and set the context here for today's conversation, Jeff, when you look at some of the trends in Industry 4.0, what are some of the ones that you're most excited about, and which ones might you set aside and say these are overhyped? That's not a real thing. Tell us what's real in the trends space and what you're most excited about and what you're not excited about.
I'd have to say what excites me the most right now is the convergence of operational data, artificial intelligence, and just modern architectures. Because I would say for years, at least over a decade, we've been digitizing machines and processes, but we've been struggling to make the data truly usable and valuable. And now we're finally starting to see architectures emerge where operational data can flow in real time. It can be contextualized and actually support decisions. And then you can add on artificial intelligence to use that to actually change the way that we operate, to move us up the intelligence layer, to move us up the agency layer, and it can completely transform companies. Now, that being said, some of the hype around artificial intelligence itself, I would say, is maybe a little misplaced. AI is incredibly powerful, but it's not magic. And so if the underlying operational data is fragmented, poorly structured, or disconnected from the real work on the plant floor, which is what generates most of the data and would use it in the end, AI is just amplifying the weaknesses that are already there. And so the real breakthrough is not a new model. It's really an operating system, a new operating system for the factory of the future, meaning that the data, the architecture, and the workflows allow intelligence to be applied continuously everywhere. So it's not really directly a trend as much as you're starting to see these convergence of things happening, that we are on the brink of some really powerful things being able to take place. And some companies are doing it.
So I know you alluded to this when you were talking about data architecture and some of the changes that have made this all possible. But on the flip side, if you look at it, I mean, we've been talking about Internet of Things. How long have we been talking about Internet of Things? Like over a decade now.
Oh, yeah.
And so Internet of Things is supposed to change everything. We've got sensors. We're capturing data at every step along the way in the manufacturing process and the supply chain. So companies have been capturing this data, to your point earlier. What's different now, though? So they've had all this data all along, potentially. What is it about the architecture and the focus on data? Like, what are companies doing differently today to where they can actually take advantage of that?
So if you think about the idea, and this is where you can philosophically get to defining Industry 4.0. So Industry 4.0 can be thought of as a description of the era that we're in right now, the fourth industrial revolution. There was a third industrial revolution, a second, and a first. And if you think about like that, that's the era that we're living in right now. And it's about all the changes that are happening, in that era. But Industry 4.0 is unique because there was no Industry 3.0 or 2.0 or 1.0 as a term, as a moniker, a nickname given to that during the era itself. So that term came out in 2011 and was adopted as part of the German high-tech strategy 2020. And so it had a very clear vision of what manufacturing would look like in the future. We've never been in an industrial revolution that had also a vision of the future at the same time. So depending on if you view it as a description of our era or if you view it as a glimpse into the future, it changes how you're seeing it right now. So if you look at it as a description of our era, we have a ton of different technologies that have come out in the past decade that each one of them arguably could be transformative. And I say could be because by itself, it wouldn't necessarily do a whole lot. Everything from IoT, digital twins, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, edge computing, virtual reality, augmented reality. You could name this list of things, but it's really the convergence of all of them and how you can figure out to take advantage of which one in which way to transform the way that your company provides value, captures value, or the way that your company works. And so it's kind of all these together that allows it. And all the pieces over the past 20 years have been built up to a point where now it's becoming very easy to capitalize on them versus years ago, it was harder to capitalize on. IoT, 10 years ago, you can connect a lot of stuff. But if you just connected a lot of stuff, that wasn't transformative by itself. Now that you can connect it, now that you can contextualize it, now that you can link it to other systems, now that you can add agency and have action taken upon it, you can start to really do some powerful stuff.
Yeah. So the companies or manufacturers in general, or the manufacturing industry in general, has been building the pieces all along. So it's like almost like a puzzle has been laid out. All the pieces were getting thrown on the pile, but they didn't really know how to put it all together. And now they're finally just starting to put together all these pieces. Is that a fair?
I don't want to say finally. Some have been doing it, for 10 years. Others have barely started. So it depends on kind of how you're defining that particular spectrum. But for example, IoT is what I think single-handedly created the biggest part of this revolution. And it's because of the proliferation of data. We have now so much data that companies don't even know what to do with. There's studies out there. IBM says 90% of IoT data is never used. You look at IDC, they say only 3% of enterprise data is ever analyzed, let alone they do something with that data. So you have this massive amount of data that's not even being used. And it really started with IoT being able to produce it. And now that we're producing it, now that we're starting to take advantage, you can move up a hierarchy of capability. So you might be familiar with the Acatech Industry 4.0 maturity index as 6 layers that you can go. So as new technology comes out, or we figure out how to integrate them together, your capability keeps rising as you go up. So it's not I achieved one and I'm done. It's hey, we did this. Now we can do something more. Now we can do something more. Now we can do something more. The baseline foundation was creating data, capturing it, and being able to understand it. Now it's what do you do with that data?
Yeah, that's well said. And the point about it being an ongoing journey, not a final destination you reach. You don't just get certified, qualified as I'm 4.0, I'm good. I'm Industry 4.0, I'm good.
There is nothing to say that. If you look at the Acatech maturity model, which others out there have followed, things like the SIRI, which is the Smart Industry Readiness Index, it's kind of based off a similar model. They have these levels and they work their way up. And the highest level in all of them is really related to autonomy, fully autonomous systems that can make decisions and act by themselves. All right. So if you look at that as the highest level, that's where AI is almost a requirement to be able to get to that level. If you look at these studies where they look at Acatech or where they look at SIRI, and you look at the average of the people that fill out the surveys, not the surveys, but get assessed by them, the average is pretty low. It's 1.55 for SIRI and it's 2.5 for Acatech, and that's 1 to 6, and then 0 to 5. So they're basically the same level. It means most companies are not even halfway to fully autonomous.
Still a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity.
But there's huge progress to go from a 0 to a 3, but 3 is not a 5.
Right. That's interesting. Very cool. Want to say hello to some other audience members here. Tomer is actually joining from Israel. I thought it was Illinois. I was way off. So thanks for. And I thought
I know him, and I know he's not in Illinois.
Yeah, I saw his name, and I was like, I thought he was in a different country. I didn't realize he was in Illinois. So that explains a lot of things there. So thank you for that, Tomer. Sorry for the mix-up. Sanjay is joining from India. Thanks for being here today. Doug says, "Hey, there's Jeff." So you've got at least a couple fans here joining us. And then Tomer says, the question is whether we haven't been on the verge of technological business change for 15 years from the definition of the revolution 4.0. And it's kind of what you're saying is we've been doing this. It wasn't like we just shifted over to now we're in industry 4.0. The pieces were getting laid and organizations were moving along towards that path.
Well, this is where you also start to differentiate between how we define transformation. So let's also take a step back. An industrial revolution is a change in the entire industry, not the change in any one company. And a lot of people get that confused. You can have a company, let's say, achieve a level 5 or level 6 on those scales in every single category, and they are the most advanced company in the world. But if the other 99.99999% of companies don't achieve that, then the industry didn't transform. So this is the difference between an industrial revolution is when enough companies change. And so as enough of them change, the whole industry as a whole changes. So we have to separate out the industry movement versus individual companies movement. So if you look at that, there are some companies that are doing fantastic, unbelievable, futuristic things. They are in the minority. And this is where you look at it and go, there are some companies that even say in 2026, oh, we haven't done Industry 3.0 yet. Well, if you're still around in 2026, you survived the third industrial revolution. You may not have changed a thing, but you survived it. You're still here. A lot of companies went out of business. So the amount of necessity for what your company needs to do to barely get by is different in your industry, your company, and whatever your goals are. But the fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0, is changing the way that companies have to strategize, invest in what they have to build. So I would argue any company you have today versus any company you have 15 years ago, they are doing stuff differently. And a lot of it is a pretty big difference. Now, is it to the level of the German high-tech strategy vision that was, the picture that was painted? No, but they are doing things massively different than they were doing 15 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. Colin is joining on YouTube from Singapore. Thank you for joining here today. And then Michael on LinkedIn has a question for you, Jeff. What role will knowledge graphs play in that convergence?
Huge amount. So this is where, as you start to move up your levels of intelligence, as you do this, you start to understand more things of being able to identify it, being able to know what it is, being able to know what caused it, and then being able to know what it will cause as you kind of move up. And really, the only way to get to higher levels of intelligence is relational understanding. Otherwise, just a standard database won't give you that relationship. It may give you a hierarchy, but it won't let you know what is related to what. And as you're trying to build an intelligent factory, a truly intelligent factory, you need to understand it's not a database, it's a system. And these systems are complex. I mean, you have to think. Material goes into assets. Assets are constrained by maintenance. Quality issues propagate across lots, and decisions that are made over there impact stuff that's made over there. That's not captured in a traditional database. Really, you have to use knowledge graphs in order to capture all these relationships, and then use the knowledge models to what you apply the AI onto, so you can better understand how AI decisions will propagate across all those systems, rather than just optimizing an isolated use case.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So I'm going to ask you a question about what organizations are getting wrong when they start their digital or smart factory journey. But before I get to that, though, do you mind just giving us a quick intro / 101 crash course on what is a smart factory? How do you simplify that, or just summarize what a smart factory is?
Well, this is where there is no universal definition for it, just like Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0, I like to generally describe as a description of our era. It's more about the revolution that is occurring across all companies, not any individual company. Smart manufacturing, or the intelligent factory, or intelligent manufacturing, or you can kind of pick whatever you want to call it, is more of a smaller view of a description of the capability gained within the function of manufacturing, as opposed to Industry 4.0 can apply outside of manufacturing as an industry, or outside of it as a function. It can apply to supply chain. It can apply to engineering. It can apply to things that don't, directly relate to the actual production of what you're making. Okay. So this, once again, there is no universal definition for it. There's probably 10 different ones depending on what you want to do. There are IEC standards and ISO standards that attempt to define it. There are government agencies that attempt to define it. But I view it as oversimplified as smart manufacturing is your ability to have information in real time as to what is going on everywhere across your production, so that you are able to make decisions faster against that particular data. It's being able to take your decision latency, the amount of time it takes you to identify, to be able to interpret, agree and act and take that and shorten it as short as possible. In order to do that requires a bunch of technology, a bunch of changes in processes, different roles. It changes a lot. So now you end up having an intelligent factory at the end where your decision latency is almost zero from when things go wrong or when things go right.
Interesting. So what is it that you see manufacturers most commonly getting wrong when they start on this journey or on this path toward smart factory?
Great segue. And part of it is because that's a high level, I'll call inspirational definition, but it doesn't provide any clarity of purpose. So this is where I'd say there's really three interrelated ideas that would make it here. The first is clarity of purpose. The second is everything being labeled transformation. And third is transformation being treated like a project. So starting with clarity of purpose, it's really hard for companies and leaders to describe what their factory looks like at the end of any sort of transformation journey. Smart manufacturing. Hey, we're building a smart factory. I'd say poor companies have no answer, like not companies that aren't doing it well. Good companies can explain the new capabilities that are gained at the end, but they can't actually describe how those capabilities translate into a new way of working, how the factory is different than when it was before. That includes everything from operating models to processes to roles. They're just describing we have a new capability that our factory can do. But when I challenge to go, great, how does that capability change the way that you manufacture? And it becomes really hard to answer. I mean, I've done this just within the past 2 weeks where I ask companies and to go, great, so you have a digital transformation journey within your manufacturing. You're trying to build an intelligent factory at the end. Describe what that factory looks like once it's all done. Tell me what it looks like. How are things different? That is very difficult for companies to articulate and agree upon. And it gets back to they have a definition at a high level, which everyone agrees and nods, but they don't know how to take that down into all the decisions that have to be made on a daily basis so that we're all working towards the same thing. The second is everything gets labeled transformation. So I really don't know any companies that haven't gone through a digital transformation already or aren't in the middle of a digital transformation right now. And regardless of how you define what it is or what the outcome is, I view it as the big thing here is most of these companies take that transformation initiative and then they turn it into projects, we'll call it, and everything gets labeled then transformation, and it's pointing towards that particular objective that they have. And I view it as that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for a couple of reasons. One, you might find out, I was dealing with one company that had a digital transformation initiative, and it was comprised of over 860 some projects, and realized like 80% of them weren't transformative. They were just modernization, optimization, just basic foundational projects that need to be done. But if you grade all 860 as a transformation, you're going to grade them wrong. You're not going to get the success that you want, and it won't lead to the transformation that you really need. Now, I bet you there's only a few of those that are truly transformative, that change the way that you work, that change the way that you create or capture value. I bet you a lot of them are just necessities that need to be done in order to enable a transformation. And then the third is treating transformation itself like a project or a collection of projects. So having 860 projects may not be the best way to do it, because each one then gets treated as its own self-contained entity that needs to be on time, on budget, and not disrupt particular things. And when you do that, you miss the connection across all of them. You miss the fact that, but number 362 can't happen unless you do 118 first. And 118 also allows 6 other things. And it's once those are allowed that you can really transform. So if you treat it like that, then you're going to stall. And this is why there are a lot of famous studies out there like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Everest Group that have high levels of digital transformation failures, 60, 70, 80%. But then KPMG in 2022 came out with a study that said 99% of digital transformation projects returned 1% ROI or higher. 99%. That means people are spending money and they're getting something back for it, but they're not hitting their objectives. So how can you have 70% failure and 99% return, in investments? And it's because they're labeling the projects wrong and they're treating it in the wrong way. A transformation project has very different KPIs than a modernization project. And I view it as if you treat your transformation like a project, projects close, transformations persist.
Yeah.
Projects deliver artifacts, transformations change operating models. Now, don't get me wrong, projects are needed in there, and a transformation will include projects, but don't turn it into a collection of projects. Otherwise, you lose the strategy between them and the interconnectedness.
That's super interesting. I mean, even going back to the first point you just made in your response there around manufacturers needing to define and agree on what they want to be when they grow up. You know, what is this going to look like, or what do we want to become? How do we want this to look?
What does it do? Not just the capability. Oh, we now can do predictive maintenance. Great. How does that change?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Manufacturing.
Yeah. Yeah. How does that better service your customers? How does it make it more profitable? Whatever KPIs you're tying it to. That's really interesting. And it's fundamental. What's interesting about what you're saying is it's true for it's not just a manufacturing thing you're bringing up.
Right.
This is just a more broad, any sort of change initiative an organization, even outside of manufacturing, might be going through. I think everything you're saying is very relevant to
For that answer, yes, it's applicable to all industries.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you see as and this is somewhat related to the previous question, but what do you see as the biggest disconnect between executive expectations and what's actually happening on the plant floor, especially when they're going through these transformative projects / initiatives?
From an expectation point, I would say it's to move fast, and it's because technology evolves fast. And that puts a sense of urgency and a sense of fear on executives to either capitalize on it as a advantage or just to not fall behind as a disadvantage. But factories are not software environments. They're physical systems with regulatory constraints, quality requirements, legacy equipment, and deeply embedded operational practices. And changing them takes time. And so the disconnect often comes from leaders expecting rapid, visible progress while the plant floor is dealing with data integration, process redesign, training, cultural change, which are the real work of transformation. So
Right.
that would be the biggest one, is the speed. And the second is the vagueness of how to use technology. And I'm going to use AI specifically. I don't know of a single executive out there that isn't telling their team to figure out how and where to use AI.
Yeah. Just
But
figure it out.
they know how to actually give guidance on what specifically to do with it and what they're attempting to get out of it. So now you have pressure to use a technology with no real intended purpose.
Right.
Why are we using it?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, it's your comment about AI and the executives that are just throwing out this, let's go pursue AI. It gets back to the previous points you're making, which is, okay, AI is great. All this technological stuff you've talked about so far is great, but why? Why are you doing it? Not because it's not a good idea, but help understand or help articulate why you want to do this and how it's going to improve your business, your customer experience, your employee experience, whatever it is, whatever objectives you're trying to accomplish.
And with that, I'll add, it was interesting. This was about 2 years ago when I did this more, when generative AI was super new and interesting, is I met with quite a few executives of manufacturers, and I learned real quickly that they had a facade of understanding AI, but no real deep understanding. Now, I don't need executives to have a in-depth technical understanding, but they do need to understand just enough to know what it can do. Because here's a test I gave one particular manufacturer with the CEO and his direct reports, so the highest level of a $10 billion manufacturer. And I used a hypothetical, and I basically said, okay, let's assume we had a chat GPT for your company, and all the company's data was perfectly integrated, perfectly contextualized. All the collective knowledge and experience of the company was at your fingertips in this new generative AI, interface, ChatGPT for your company. What would you ask it? And I gave them as an exercise to go, give me the 3 questions that you would ask it. And I did that. And then the next day we came back and we reviewed the answers. And what I basically found is this exposed that they don't really understand the technology. And if they don't understand the technology, how are they going to be able to guide their teams? Roughly 50%-ish of the answers that they picked out of there were things that had nothing to do with generative AI. They were basic classical machine learning that we've been able to do for like 10, 15 years. Like, if that's what you're using it for, there's nothing generative about that except a prettier interface. The actual meat behind it is machine learning. We've been able to do that for years. There was about 25% that was like a perfect use case. I'm like, this is a great example of how you should be using it. And 25% were just completely wrong. They either exposed ethical boundaries, not intentional, but just not what you should be using it for, or a complete misunderstanding of like, that's not possible today. Maybe one day in the very far future, but like that can't work. And so then you think about it, like 25% were like good use cases that these executives would actually use it for. How good do you think their AI strategy is going to be if that's their understanding of what generative AI can do?
Yeah. I would think the industry can do better than that, better than the 25%. I'm here with Jeff Winter. We're talking about Industry 4.0 and everything that manufacturers need to know about it. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 265. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also see all 264 past episodes of the show at that same website. You can subscribe, listen, watch wherever you'd prefer by just going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So I'm here with Jeff Winter. We're talking about what manufacturers need to know about Industry 4.0. I want to turn to the audience again, too. We have another legend in the room listening in. Jan Baan joining on YouTube says, Eric, nice to meet you. Your podcast from the Netherlands. Jan is the founder of Baan Software, a manufacturing ERP system from the 90s. And now he's the CEO of a company called Rapid, which does AI-driven workflow type automation. So thanks for being here, Jan. Interesting comment here from Tomer on LinkedIn. Tomer says the success rate of digital transformation projects are too similar to the success rates of SAP projects. I kind of want to turn this into a question though for you, Jeff. Do you find that manufacturers go find like an off-the-shelf ERP system, for example, like an SAP, Oracle, Infor, Epicor, whatever? Do you find that they go find the software and say, this is how we're going to become a smart factory, or this is how we're going to pursue Industry 4.0, is we're just going to go find the software and that's going to solve things for us? Or do you find companies like mixing up ERP technology initiative with true Industry 4.0 smart factory types of initiatives? Or
good question. I'd have to break it into like two parts of the answer. So once again, this gets back to why are you doing it? Is it a modernization project? Is just your ERP outdated? It doesn't meet current requirements, current standards, and you're just doing it to stay current, to stabilize? That's very different than if you're looking to take advantage of all the features that are built in to get the most out of the system, optimization, or are you doing this to completely change the way that your company operates? Those are three massively different projects, all with the same software. So it depends on, once again, why are you doing the upgrade? Now, in terms of the software itself, I kind of see two general approaches that people take. We're either buying a software and we're going to make our processes match the software, or we're going to do it the exact opposite. We're going to look for software that matches our processes or build it ourselves if we can't find it. That's a fundamental, probably the biggest decision your company needs to do. And I can't give advice unless I know more specifically how your company operates, your digital maturity, your industry, how far your practices are, the standard deviation from industry best practices and standards, to know, does it make sense for you to standardize what you do to the industry, or is the way you do it, unique, and that is an advantage in yourself? Now, from what I've seen in my experience, at least in the manufacturing industry, your ERP and your MES are the two software initiatives that are the most difficult and require the most amount of knowledge of your particular company and the way it works in order to be able to make it successful. So they're inherently going to have a higher failure rate, because you can't just implement the technology by being a technologist. You have to be functionally involved in how the company operates in order to make it succeed. And I believe, I know I'm biased, but manufacturing is one of the industries that so many companies differ in the way that they do what they do. I don't think you see that as much in healthcare or finance or retail, but in manufacturing, the way that you make ice cream has nothing to do with the way that you make a car. And there's almost nothing the same in terms of the way it's sold, the way that it's made, the way that it's stored, the way that it's processed. Almost nothing is the same. And so because of that, imagine how different an ERP and an MES system would be in those environments. And so the amount of knowledge required to pull it off successfully is way higher than most other systems that you would buy that could be more kind of repeatable to industry. And a lot of IT softwares are that way, where, hey, it functionally works the same in any industry.
Yeah. You just sort of touched on and triggered me. One of my triggers as a consultant is this concept of best practices in prepackaged software. And you just hit it on the head, and it sort of resonated with me when you said, the way you make ice cream is so different than making a car. I mean, manufacturing in general, even if you just look at, you take it even further and look at a manufacturer of highly complex technical industrial products. How about comparing that to an ice cream manufacturer? I mean, that's just totally different. Now you're talking make to stock versus make to engineer to order, just totally different processes. And so when a software vendor, any sort of technology provider like an SAP or an Oracle, one of these big name vendors comes out and says, hey, we've got manufacturing best practices baked into our software. You want to be Industry 4.0, you want to be a smart factory, you want to modernize whatever, then use our software because we have best practices. I mean, do you see that being a path forward? Because I always feel like that's going to lead you astray, and that's just going to constrain you more than it helps you in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for all, but a lot of the big ERP manufacturer, the big ERP software companies, they are trying to get more into that landscape. And manufacturing was a bigger industry that actually helped push the whole concept of ERP software to begin with. And so they are realizing there's a lot of value in getting lower in the tech stack and connecting all those systems together so that ERP can be the master of everything. Yeah. The problem can be is, where do you draw the line between how low it goes and in what parts or what functions of the organization it does go? Because this is where the difference between, it might be technically possible, but no one knows how to do it. And then you're in a very difficult spot. But then secondarily, you're right. It's very difficult to apply some of those functions across industries. And that's partly why, if you look at some reports out there like IoT Analytics and their industrial software report, MES is the software category that's the most fragmented. And they define that as the most amount of vendors that are available. No one has any leading market share. There's no one that even has double-digit market share. And most of the companies in there, it's like 300 they evaluate, don't even compete with each other. They don't even consider them competitors. How can you be in the same software category and go, nope, we're not even competitors. We would never compete. And it's because the software is so specialized to a particular industry that, yes, the company's selling it to an ice cream manufacturer versus a airplane manufacturer. Like, I don't know what's similar about that software, very little, outside of it's doing a similar conceptual function. But you need the expertise to be able to make it work for your particular thing. So getting back to the ERP, it absolutely can go down the stack in certain scenarios, but it can't in others.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone's got to figure that out. Is it the manufacturer or the vendor?
Right. Yeah, I would argue it should be the manufacturer that ultimately figures out what path makes the most sense to get you where you need to go. Here's a related, really interesting question from Christina on LinkedIn, and I'll have to read the whole question here because it won't show on the screen. But Christina says, I see a lot of folks in pharma using regulations as a shield to stay stuck in Industry 3.0. In your experience, are there other high compliance sectors that have actually cracked the code on being both agile and compliant? Or is the red tape a valid excuse for us to lag behind? I love this question because I don't know the answer to it. So
I mean, if you look at ISPE, there's Pharma 4.0 as a framework that they've come up with, which is a modified version of the Architect specifically to pharma. I mean, this is where I would still view there is a large part of the processes and functions within the, I'm just going to call it the manufacturing function, all right, the actual production environment that can be upgraded to Industry 4.0 without impacting, you know, the regulatory requirements, let alone if you want to use technology to improve or speed up or make more efficient the actual compliant parts. I'm not even going to talk about that one. I'm just going to talk about all the stuff that doesn't even really relate to it. There are functions related to maintenance and others that you can make massive improvements on that don't impact the actual, I'm going to call it the standardized processes for making the product, the traceability, the documentation requirements, you know, that are necessary there, let alone if you want to use it for that. The hardest part that people find with the technology is the explainability, I'm saying, of AI. It's depending on if you're saying AI, which I'm going to carve out on its own, or all the other technologies. Good examples, digital twins are very, very easy to implement, and you can ride them above your actual processes. So now you're just getting information collection that you can use for analysis, but it's not actually controlling or impacting anything real time. If you want to use AI, same way, are you using it to draw insights on what's happening, or using AI to automatically control back the process? And that's a big difference. But usually the biggest thing that people run into is explainability. And that's what's stalling it more than the actual capability, is that people have a hard time explaining how they're meeting requirements and regulations using some of that technology. So starting point, there's so much out there in pharma that you can do without touching that before you even tackle that part.
Yeah. Now I would say, you know, just even outside of pharma, in manufacturing in general, one thing we have seen, to Christina's point, is, you know, I think this is more of a change management issue, is when you have resistance to change, sometimes you'll see people that say, well, you don't understand how regulations work on our industry, or I'm in Brazil and the reporting requirements here are so different that you just would never understand. Therefore, we can't implement your changes that you're suggesting. So I think it can be a smoke screen in some ways for change resistance. But to your point, I think there's ways around that for sure. Also, I want to say hello to Lean on LinkedIn, joining from Holland. And then I want to read a comment. I won't put it on the screen just because it's a longer comment, but it's a good one. This is from Nelson on LinkedIn. Nelson says, when we talk about transformation, we must clearly define the real outcomes we expect at both the program and strategic levels. Every transformation is ultimately delivered through projects, and it is essential that the change management team provides accurate, timely, and actionable information about what the transformation truly represents for the organization. So building on what you'd said earlier around, making sure you've got a clear vision of what it is you want to be, and then ultimately converting that into execution. And then this leads to an audience question I think is a really good one here from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, what capabilities must exist inside an organization before they're truly ready to pursue an Industry 4.0 transformation? I know data is one. You talked about that, but what else would you say?
I mean, the biggest capabilities, you need to have your foundational infrastructure ready to have the right data at the right time to the right people. And that requires a lot of stuff to happen to come together. It requires like a network infrastructure. It requires a data infrastructure. It requires the right applications so that you have the right information at the right time. And a huge component of that is just the data contextualization of, do we know what this data means and when that data should be presented to which person at which time and what it should be a part of and what decisions. That's a huge foundational piece, and it's massive. But if you can get that, all the other cool technologies that are out there, most notably AI right now, can easily run on top of that. Otherwise, you're going to invest a ton of money in AI and barely get a lot out of it. You're just going to be like just using only a fraction of what its capability is because you don't have it real data. You're using it as like a chat GPT with public information rather than your company's information.
Right. Great points. Zach on LinkedIn says, "Hey gang, here's a comment that I want to convert into a question, and I'm going to tie this back to Emma. We were talking about Emma earlier and how you shared a stage with her, and I imagine she talked a lot about people and change management type stuff. This question is very much related to that, so I'll ask you to bring out your inner Emma roll-off and combine it with your manufacturing background. But Juan on LinkedIn says, at the end, is the correct balance between compliance, productivity, and people care. Depending on the industry, each pillar is bigger or not, but we must care about people integrity, growth, and well-being if possible." So it's more of a comment, but maybe I'll turn it into a question for you, Jeff. And that is, how does change management, I know this is a big question, so I'm trying to figure out how to narrow it down a bit for you, but just what's your knee-jerk reaction to how change management fits into all this? I mean, as far as the people side of things, the human dimension, I know we've talked a lot about strategic vision, executive alignment, data, architecture. We've talked a lot about all these different components, but what about the people side? What are your just general observations or lessons there?
I mean, if you use the word transformation, it starts and ends with people. If the people don't change, you did not transform. You can install a system, but if people aren't using it, and if they're not using it in a different way, then you didn't transform, because you may install a new system and they're working around it, or they're figuring out how to do their old job the same way with a new system. That's not transformation. So yes, it starts with having a good vision. It's then having a strategy, and a big component of that strategy is how are we going to actually transform? There is a huge amount in the processes and people side that have to happen. I mean, most companies way underestimate the amount of time it takes to just communicate what the changes are and get people kind of on board with wanting to change. If you talk to good digital transformation leaders, whoever is tasked with the transformation of the company, you'll find that easily half of their time, more than half their time, is just communicating to people what's happening over and over and over and over and over again, let alone having a change management office of a team that's tasked with training, that's tasked with actually going out and upskilling, reskilling, and getting the people on board. But if you don't, you're gonna be one of those failure statistics that, hey, you got a good ROI, but you didn't change anything. I mean, so yes, all transformation starts and ends with people, and they always will be. There's nothing unique about digital there. It's just all transformation. Otherwise, you didn't transform.
Yeah. I would argue you probably won't get the ROI if you don't address that people side of it. Maybe you do, but I think.
Well, that's what I would say. The KPMG study said 99% of those projects achieved at least 1% ROI, and then they went up from there. You can modernize a system and it reduce your number of, let's say, IT tickets, or reduce, some like downtime from a stability issue. You didn't transform anything, but it was worth the spend.
Yeah, very interesting. So Zach on LinkedIn, I swear I did not plant this question or pay him to say this, but Zach says, still looking for speakers or sponsors for Digital Stratosphere. Yes, we are. Our Digital Stratosphere conference is coming up in September, and we are looking for speakers and sponsors. So if you have ideas such as maybe, who knows, maybe Jeff Winters will end up joining us. Maybe we ask the audience, what do you think? Should I formally invite Jeff live and put him on the spot and say, hey, will you come speak at our Digital Stratosphere event? Tell me if
this isn't live enough.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So I want to come back to a thought there. We talked about change management. Let me get rid of this question off the screen. What are the biggest pain points that manufacturers are raising with you right now? As you go around the country, you're speaking at events, you're talking to manufacturers all the time. What are the biggest pain points you're hearing from other manufacturing companies?
Sure. I'd probably say it is 3 things, and the third one I think is probably because of the first 2. And one is data fragmentation. I mean, people are realizing that they have way more data than they realize, created by way more sources than they realize, all being created differently. And so you end up having data everywhere, but reality exists nowhere in any one given spot. And so it's very removed from the decision-making process because of its fragmentation. So that's probably the first thing. I mean, that's where if you look at the amount of time it takes just to make sense of data is huge. The second is complexity. And this is complexity across many different things, realizing that manufacturing processes are extremely complex, realizing the technologies themselves are new and often complex, and then the integration of tying them all together in the proper architectures that align to a new operating model is complex. And so I think as a result of both of those, you end up getting scaling successful pilots is the biggest challenge. That's like what it results in is we're having trouble scaling our pilot because once again, if you go back to what I said kind of earlier, one of the things that people do wrong is they treat transformation as a collection of small little projects. Usually they'll start with pilots. You take a pilot, you go, we want to test this technology. Let's go do it on that line over there. And you get it functionally operative. Like it works. But that is not scaling. That's not considering how do we roll this out 5,000 times in 30 factories in 8 different countries and go, how do we do this in different environments? And that's a whole different level of skill and foresight that most companies don't fully prepare for. Is we didn't think of the scenarios that are necessary to properly pilot. A proof of technology working is super easy. And if you can't do that, I don't even know where to start because almost any vendor, they will work on that pilot. But you need someone that can help you go, yeah, but are you considering all these factors the moment you attempt to roll it out across the company? So that ends up becoming where things stall, is moving from pilot to scale. And I think it's because of complexity and data fragmentation.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and it brings it full circle back to one of the first things you said in this conversation, which is manufacturers have been accumulating these bits and pieces of competencies over the years. They just haven't figured out how to pull it all together until more recently. And the ones that are successful are the ones that are figuring that out.
Ones that, and they invest in architecture, like enterprise architecture, governance, and standardization. So you don't end up creating hundreds of tiny custom projects and tiny custom one-offs and exceptions everywhere. And then you're doing a lot of work, but you're not getting back to transforming.
Right. Ricardo on LinkedIn says, come visit Colorado, Jeff. And that is where our Digital Stratosphere event is. So we've got at least one vote of someone saying that I should invite you to
all right.
Stratosphere in Denver. I want to come back to, there's a couple questions here I want to get to. Here's one from Sanjay on LinkedIn. He says, how do you maintain the downsizing the capabilities for the transformation projects in change management?
What do you mean downsizing the capabilities?
Yeah, maybe you could restate that, Sanjay. I thought I knew what it meant, and then as I was reading, I actually don't understand what the question is either. But I'm intrigued by it, though, because you're talking about change management, downsizing. Intriguing. I thought he was talking about downsizing as a company and how do you manage, but we'll come back to that. Here's a comment from Cassiana on LinkedIn. From an ERP implementation perspective, I often see companies wanting a lot of capabilities before stabilizing their core processes. Do you see that a lot in companies that are trying to go through a formal Industry 4.0 smart factory change initiative where they have trouble, like they need to get their basic house in order before they start thinking too much about getting too far ahead of themselves on a transformation?
I mean, I don't know if this is even limited to just ERP, but my experience from I'm going to call it ERP or MES, a lot of the driving factor for those particular projects, because they're usually labeled an ERP project or an MES project, is a modernization project. Like they're realizing that this is a hindrance rather than an enabler. And so as soon as they view it as that, they're focusing on upgrade, whether it's because the old version of the software is now end of life and you're being forced to upgrade it, or there's some just basic capability that's necessary just to keep doing what you're doing. It ends up driving the upgrade into something that's stabilized. I actually see few, but not all, where companies go and evaluate ERP and MES, we'll call it vendors, and go, show me what your systems really can do if we took full advantage of everything that you offered. And you got to help us get there to take advantage of this. I see very few that are looking at that from a cutting edge. If you let's just use SAP or Oracle, it doesn't even matter from an ERP side, and use their cutting edge offering, it could be extremely transformative, but I don't see many in their ERP upgrades doing that shift simultaneously. And that's normal. I mean, you can modernize your system first, get it functioning, then you can start to optimize it, getting the most out of what you already have. Then you can start taking advantage of new modules, capabilities, features of that system that will completely change workflows and people's jobs to transform. But to do it all at the same time is a big undertaking. But I don't see many starting with the vision of what can your system do? And we want to work towards that over the next 8 years.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times there's hidden value there. You've already invested in some cases. You've already invested in the technology.
You already bought the modules in some cases. You're not using them.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't necessarily mean you need to go find new software and implement a new set of shelfware. You already have the shelfware that's been sitting there. You just aren't getting the value out of it. So it's a great point. I want to jump ahead and bring this all full circle. I'll jump ahead to a question that there's a lot of questions we didn't get to that I wanted to ask. So, which means, of course, we need to have you back on because we only got through about half the questions I had for you. And I know the audience has more questions too. But if we were to wrap this up and summarize, and you had to give manufacturers one piece of advice, or maybe I'll let you have 2 or 3 if you want, but a couple pieces of advice you'd give to manufacturers to focus on in the next 12 to 18 months, what would that be?
I'm going to give 2 different answers here. First is I always like to start with everyone making sure that they have the right art of the possible and the right art of the practical. And I like using this term. Everyone in the world should have the same view of the art of the possible. What can be done based off the technologies today? And that art of the possible is constantly evolving as new things come out. But you need to know what the art of the possible is. If you don't have a clear agreement across the teams making the decisions, you're always going to limit what you can do. The art of the practical is what your company realistically should do within that art of the possible. And that will be different for every company based off your maturity, your goals, your industry, a whole bunch of different factors. But what I see happen is a lot of companies, they start to develop their art of the practical, their vision down here, thinking that it is the art of the possible. When I have to go, no. You can do this. You're down here. So you've already handicapped and limited yourself before you ever started because of the vision of what you think can be done. It's okay if this is what you do, but don't do it because you think that is cutting edge and leading and what's possible. No, it's just what you're doing. This is what's possible. So the first is understanding everyone in the world should have that same art of the possible. And then everyone needs to have their own unique art of the practical for what their company is going to do. So that's more of a visionary thing, but educate yourself, spend the time as a team to make sure we're all talking about what the same thing looks like at the end. What can we do if we use all the technologies today? And the second is just more of a practical thing to do is you need to work on the data and architecture foundation that is going to enable intelligence across your operations. Because everyone's wanting intelligence and they're realizing that you're going to be just limited if you don't have the basics in place. And this includes just to start, get your data accessible and contextualized. Just at a bare minimum, that's a massive project. I'm underplaying the level of work that's required, but that is a project that if you justify it the right way, if you understand how it links to all the different transformation initiatives you can do, it should justify itself in a heartbeat. Because that one project in itself won't really provide much ROI, but is going to enable so many other projects to be possible. And if you present that in the right way, you need to start working on that project now. If you don't have a modern, updated data architecture and network and infrastructure in line, I don't know why you're doing any of your other projects.
Right. Sounds like you've got bigger fish to fry and maybe focus on those. Well, thanks very much, Jeff, and thanks to the audience for the great questions there. I really enjoyed the conversation. We'll definitely have to have Jeff back on to talk about the stuff we didn't get to, but that was a good starting point for us to unpack Industry 4.0. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to unpack that conversation a bit more. We're also going to get into everything you need to know and the things you need to watch out for as you evaluate potential ERP and technology solutions. We've got a lot more to cover. Be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness In lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects, I've included as many lessons that could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 265. My name's Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Jeff on the show. We talked about Industry 4.0, manufacturing, transformation, ERP, all kinds of stuff related to Industry 4.0 and manufacturing. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think there was a lot of really great points, but there was a couple that really stood out to me. The first was the distinction between the art of possible and then the art of practical.
Yeah.
I think it was a really clear way to explain something that I think a lot of organizations can struggle with. And with that, Eric, one question I have for you for that specifically is, from your experience working with companies across industries, where do you most often see the gap between the art of possible and what leaderships believe is possible?
Yeah, I think it's two different ways of looking at things. One is to look at what you already have and figure out how do you incrementally improve things. And that's where I think most organizations start, versus more of not a clean slate approach, but more of a let's look ahead. Let's look beyond what we're encumbered by right now with our current systems and limitations and knowledge. Let's look at what, how can we totally transform the way we do business? And I don't know that necessarily either one is right or wrong. I think it's just a matter of, to Jeff's point, making sure that you have alignment and you're all on the same page and rolling in the same direction on how you accomplish that. So I think, yes, Art of Possible is more of a clean slate, more of a long-term, bigger picture, probably a more swinging for the fences or a quantum leap improvement to your business. Whereas the traditional way of thinking about it is more incremental. And that's okay for like a risk averse company or one that is moving deliberately slower than some other organizations. But if you're an organization that's really trying to outdo your competition, or if your industry is being severely disrupted and you're at risk, your current business model is not going to sustain the business, then you probably need to take more of a art of the possible approach, where you're taking more of that quantum leap, big picture approach.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I really liked about the conversation was the idea that transformation starts and ends with people. And even though like installing new systems or implementing new technologies, that doesn't really change or automatically change the way that the company operates as a whole. So with that, Eric, when organizations start transformation initiatives, what are some early signs that they are treating it like a collection of projects instead of a true operating model transformation?
Well, I think if there's not an overarching program management office that is directing traffic on all these different projects, then you're probably more likely to be the organization that's just, a random haphazard collection of projects that maybe are sort of moving in the right direction or in the same direction, but in many cases they're not. So I think if you do have an overarching PMO and someone or some group of people within the organization that are managing all these different pieces, then you're more likely to keep everyone in sync and make sure all these projects work together towards the same set of goals and objectives. Too often it just becomes too fragmented throughout the company to where different people are doing different things and going in different directions. But that's why a lot of organizations are leveraging our help to institute more of a PMO approach to, like, let's put an internal PMO in place so that you can be the one to manage all the different vendors and projects and system integrators, and you can have more ownership, control, accountability, and just efficiency, between all these different projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question to kind of wrap up this entire conversation. For you, Eric, looking ahead into the next 12 to 18 months, what do you think will separate companies that successfully move towards Industry 4.0 from those that continue to struggle with transformation?
I think Jeff said it best. I mean, it's the ones that can tie together all these different pieces and parts that they've been accumulating and working on over the years. And in some cases, they're just now getting started on accumulating some of the bits and pieces. But it's looking at all the different moving parts, everything from the data and architecture, which he started the conversation by talking about data and architecture. We didn't talk a lot about process improvement, but being more deliberate about, to your point, the art of the possible within your process improvements and using the business processes to drive the technology rather than just hoping that if I put in new technology, that's going to lead me to Industry 4.0. And then last but not least is the people side of it, the human change management side of things, is everything from designing what the jobs are going to look like, how they're going to be impacted, and helping navigate and manage people through the change, which, by the way, spoiler alert, that's the part that takes the longest and is the hardest to do. So that's probably going to be on the critical path of how fast you go through a transformation, is how well you handle the people side of it. So I think it's a combination of looking at the technology, your business process improvements, and then the people / change management side of things. And within all that, making sure that it all ties back up to an overarching, clear, deliberate strategy that ties to some non-technical set of objectives. It's more focused on your overall business strategy. So it's easier said than done, but if you can do all those things and tie all that together in a neat package, then that's going to be a lot more likely to succeed than the ones that don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great conversation today with Jeff. It was great having him on.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. We'll definitely have to have him back. And I love talking about manufacturing stuff, and he's a great guest to do it. So thanks to him for being on. And we're going to shift gears now, though, and talk about software selection and all the things you need to know and the biggest mistakes that are often made during the software selection process. As we talked about earlier in this episode, we as a company at Third Stage help a lot of our clients through the software selection process. Some companies hire us after they've already selected software and they just need help implementing, or they need help setting up their PMO, their change management. They need help implementing the project. In some cases, they're hiring us to help remediate or recover a failed project. But a lot of clients start from the very beginning and say, okay, we don't know what we're going to do yet, so help us figure out what the right path forward is. And being independent and tech agnostic gives us a very unbiased, objective view of the market and an ability to help clients pick the software that best fits their needs, regardless of who the vendor is. So I want to share with you this YouTube clip where I talk about some of the things that are pitfalls that organizations commonly fall into and some of the lessons learned from those projects. So let's roll the clip and we'll come back and talk about it. First things first, why are you doing this? Sounds simple enough. You may wonder what in the world I'm talking about, but it's amazing how many organizations cannot answer the simple question of why are we evaluating new ERP software? Now, I'll tell you the most common answer that we hear, which is also the worst answer you could possibly give. And I'm curious to hear in the comments below if this is your reason or if you've heard others say that this is their reason. And that is because we have to, because our vendor is discontinuing the old software that we're using now. If that's your number one reason, it's a reason, but it's a terrible reason. You need to have better rationale for why you're going through an ERP evaluation. And more importantly, you need to have a better reason for why you're about to go through the huge price tag, the chaos, the heartache, the pain, and the disruption that inevitably comes with any ERP implementation. The good news is it's a fairly simple question to answer, and just because you don't have an answer right now necessarily doesn't mean you can't get one. And I would highly encourage you to answer the question before you get too far down the path, because why are we doing this is such an important guideline for determining which software is going to be the best fit for you. Now, it may be that you know you're going to stay on the same platform that you're already on. It may mean that you're just going to go through an upgrade, but you have to ask yourself, are you doing that just because the vendor told you that they're going to discontinue and sunset their old product? Or is it legitimately something you really need to do and you see the business value in it? And even if the real answer is because you know you're going to have your software be discontinued, you still want to define business objectives and priorities, what it is you want to get out of the software, what you want the transformation to deliver to the organization, other than just being on a software platform that still has support and maintenance available for it. So this is something that starts at the leadership level that executives need to help define and prioritize what the strategic drivers are for the organization, including the criteria for how you're going to select and implement a new ERP solution. When we're helping clients through their evaluation process, we commonly will come up with a list of hundreds and sometimes even thousands of potential business requirements. And it is really easy to get lost in analysis paralysis when you have that many requirements. Those requirements will all become important at some point during your ERP journey, but they're oftentimes not important in the initial evaluation. Let me explain what I mean. If I'm going through the process with a client and with our team doing a requirements analysis, and I'm trying to understand what the business needs are, what the drivers are, we're going to capture every single requirement regardless of whether or not it's something that's critical to the evaluation process. Largely because every single requirement is going to be important from a requirements traceability perspective later on when you go to implement the software. But more often than not, we find an 80-20 rule applies, in that 80% of the business requirements are probably going to be able to be handled pretty well by most ERP systems that are out there. But there's that 20% of your business that's different. It's your differentiator, it's your secret sauce, it's that customer-facing side of things that make you different, it's the product-facing side of things that make you different. Those are the things that can really separate and differentiate different ERP systems in the market. And those are the things you want to focus most on, those deal breakers that are things you know you have to have. And not only are they things you have to have, but they're things that not every ERP system has. So this is where having outside expertise can help, because if you have a list of 1,000 business requirements, you're probably going to want to get that list down to 1 or 200 and focus on those 1 or 200 requirements and evaluation criteria rather than trying to analyze all 1,000 plus different requirements. So that's the first thing, is understand what your deal breakers are before you get too far into the evaluation process. Another thing to understand, and a common pitfall that organizations don't seem to realize oftentimes when they go through a software evaluation process, is that cloud system deployments are going to be disruptive. And not only are they going to be disruptive, but they're going to be more disruptive than what you might have experienced with your old on-premise implementations in the past. Reason being is that cloud deployments impose more change on the organization because cloud software is what it is, and it's very difficult to change that software to be as flexible as you may have once had with your on-premise system, for better or for worse. So you have to recognize that when you're evaluating the time and cost and the risk associated with a cloud deployment, time, cost, and risk are going to be higher for your cloud deployments when you compare it to your old on-premise system in most cases. And cloud vendors might say, no, that's not true because we have our software in the cloud, we've got best practices, it's off the shelf, out of the box, it's going to work for you. The reality is it's going to be more of a disruption, and that's the part that slows down projects, creates risk, and increases the price tag. So when you're evaluating software, you not only want to look at the functionality of the software, but you also want to understand what are we really going to spend in terms of time, money, and risk on deploying this project so that we can make an educated and informed decision. Too often organizations make a decision with inaccurate information, and with the benefit of hindsight, they may have determined that that was the wrong decision, but they didn't have complete information during the evaluation phase. So this is an important aspect of making sure that you are going in with your eyes wide open into your evaluation process. Another thing to consider as you're evaluating potential software systems is fully understanding the deployment model of the technology, especially in today's day and age where we're in a sort of transition from a lot of on-premise systems moving to a version of the cloud. And this is a big pitfall because a lot of times organizations sign a contract go to deploy the software without fully realizing or understanding what type of software it is they're buying. Software vendors themselves, in many cases, are transitioning. So they may show you one thing, but then deliver or sell to you something different when it comes time to sign the deal and get started on the implementation. And so it's important to understand the three different basic deployment models. The first model is on-premise, and this is the historic model of deploying ERP systems where you install the software on a server within your four walls, within your IT server room, and you can do whatever you want with that software, for better or for worse. Most software vendors are moving away from that model, but there's still a certain number of software providers that do provide on-premise solutions in part or in whole. Sometimes they'll have certain modules that are still on-premise. Other times they'll have a hybrid of both, which leads us to cloud. Just because the software is in the cloud doesn't mean that all cloud solutions are created equally. You have two different primary types of cloud solutions. You have private cloud, which is sort of a middle ground between on-premise and fully public cloud, where you still have your own version or instance of the software, but it's hosted in someone else's cloud, whether it be your software vendor or Azure or Amazon Web Services or whoever it may be. This allows you to have cloud technology, but also the flexibility to customize and change the software that you may have been accustomed to with your on-premise model. And then finally, the third model is public cloud, where it's a public version of the cloud. It's usually multi-tenant, to where you have multiple companies that are using the same software, protecting your data, of course, but the same core software is being used across all the different customers that are using that solution. This is the least flexible of the three options in most cases. And that's important to know, because if there are deficiencies or gaps between what that public cloud solution can do versus what you think you need, that's going to be a lot more disruptive and hard to navigate than if you were going with a private cloud or an on-premise model. So that's one of the big pitfalls, is fully understanding what modules and which capabilities within your software solution tech stack are within each of these three buckets, because that will materially affect not only the level of fit with your business operations, but the level of flexibility and the cost and risk associated with that deployment. Contrary to popular belief, you do not have to choose just one ERP system. And this is a common pitfall that a lot of organizations fall into, largely because there's so much pressure from software vendors to double down on one solution, and largely because it sounds so good in theory, especially at the executive level within organizations. It sounds a lot better to buy one system that handles all my needs rather than buying 5 or 7 different systems that handle different things within the organization. And if I'm an IT staff member, I love the idea of one system, because now I don't have to maintain 5 or 7 different systems. I can just maintain that one. However, the reality is that that may not be the best fit for your organization. In fact, we're finding that in recent years, it's becoming increasingly common for organizations to intentionally want multiple systems, not because they want technical complexity, not because they want 2 different sources of truth, or they want to add cost and complexity to their environment, but because they know it gives them a certain amount of flexibility to allow them to navigate all the changes that their businesses are going through and to address the deficiencies and the weaknesses of the different systems that they're deploying. So the best of breed model, the composable ERP model, that trend is continuing here in the late 2020s. And that's something you should be aware of, is you don't have to choose just one system. It may mean that you want to look at different categories of technologies and mix and match to find the right solution that fits best for you. Almost like a puzzle that's built just for you. You need to find those pieces and put it together in a way that fits you and completes the picture of what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization. So that was our video from YouTube, where I talk about some of the biggest pitfalls and things you need to know as it relates to the software selection process. What were some of your thoughts and questions and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, I think what stood out for me in the video is, first, you recommended cutting a list of 1,000 requirements down to about 100 to 200 focused evaluation criteria, which I definitely think companies probably can get sucked into having way too many requirements. So that's probably something that a lot of companies need to hear. And then my other thing that stood out for me in this video is the composable best of breed argument is positioned as a growing trend in the late 2020s. And it's not a niche preference, but an increasingly intentional strategic choice. So those are what stood out to me, but I definitely have some follow-up questions for you, Eric. One being, you say because our vendor is discontinuing our software is the worst reason to start an ERP evaluation. But practically, you tell a CFO who's starting at an end of life notice and a board that wants to move fast. How do you get them to slow down and define real business objectives?
Yeah, great point, great question. I'd say the first thing you do is slow down to speed up. So I think, you speak their language. If they want to speed up, the fastest way to go fast is to slow down at the beginning. And so you kind of have to meet them where they are. They want to go fast. Okay, here's how you go fast. You don't just rush into it. It's like if you're running a marathon, you don't sprint as fast as you possibly can for the first mile, even though that will get you ahead and you'll be winning by the end of mile one. You're probably going to be winning that race. But by mile 2, 3, 4, 5, certainly as you get through the marathon, you're going to be dead or not finishing the race at all. So that's the kind of analogy or the way of thinking you have to frame it with executives. So you want to move fast. Here's how you do it. The best way to move fast is to get things right up front, to get the blueprint in place, the processes laid out, have a realistic plan, and make sure you have the right resources lined up. Make sure you have governance over your outside vendors and system integrators, not the other way around. The time you take to do that is going to speed things up, and it's going to save you time and money throughout the project. So that's probably the best ways. You are going to move faster. You just may not feel like you're going as fast as you want at the end of mile one, to use the marathon analogy. Maybe you're not quite winning the race yet, but you're pacing yourself. And by the time you get through the race, you're going to be well ahead because you paced yourself and you had a plan, you conditioned for the race, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last question I have is, I think, in my opinion, it's going to surprise a lot of people in the video that you mentioned how cloud is actually more disruptive than on-premise. Can you give a specific example, obviously without naming a client if you don't want to, of a cloud migration that was dramatically more disruptive than anybody expected and what the root cause of that was?
Yeah. I'll talk about one client right now that we're working with. It's a large construction company in the US, and they're moving from an old on-premise legacy system to SAP S/4HANA public cloud. So massive change, to go from a highly customized on-premise to now a public cloud version of SAP. And the company has grown a lot since they first implemented this legacy system 30 years ago. So they've gone through a lot of changes. They've grown, they've outgrown that system. That system is clearly no longer the right fit for them. And they chose S/4HANA and then hired us to come in and help do the phase 0 planning for the S/4HANA implementation. And now we're helping them with the program management. We're doing the change management. We're helping manage the system integrator and all the other stuff that goes into a big SAP or ERP project. And so in that case, there's so far, we're seeing two major threads of disruption. One is on the IT side, because now you're used to having this on-prem system that you customize. You have all the knowledge in your head, the tribal knowledge about how it was customized. Now you're forfeiting that knowledge and deferring now to a vendor who's provided an off-the-shelf cloud solution, where now they control, the clean core and the upgrades to the software and all that stuff. So that's a big IT disruption. It's a big change management issue. But from the business perspective, it's arguably even bigger, the impact to them, because now you're used to getting whatever you want in this highly customized system. Now you can't get what you want if you're a business person. You've got to defer to some degree, at least, to what the software can and can't do, the pros and cons, the limitations. And it just imposes just a massive amount of change to the team members. And in fact, yesterday, I was meeting with the CIO of this exact company. And I went into our AI tool where we're tracking all the meetings and everything that's happening in the project. And I just pulled up a list of all the major changes that were identified just in the last 30 days. And I wanted to show it to the CIO just to show that no one of these decisions is a major showstopper or a major impact. But when you add it up and you look at this entire list of close to 100 different major change impacts and changes to the business, that's what gets you. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, I was telling her. And that it's not going to be any one of these things that's going to derail the project or make things painful or disruptive to the organization. It's going to be the combination of all 100 of these things. And by the way, that list of 100 things or close to 100 things is going to grow. I mean, it's going to be in the hundreds by the time we get through this project, because we're only a few months into it and we've still got a year to go. So there's a lot more to do and a lot more disruption to expose, but already we're seeing that there's just a lot of it. So, and it's little stuff. I mean, like I said, if you look at the list, it's stuff like we need to change the way we do our job costing. We need to change the way we set up our GL. We've got to set up new company codes now for all. They have 35 different business units. So now we've got to set up different company codes, and that's going to affect the accounting and the reporting. So any one of these, you're like, okay, that's not a big deal. It affects a few people here and there, but we'll figure it out. But then all of a sudden you look at a list of 100 of these things, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of change all at once that this organization is going to go through. So I couldn't point to one thing, but I would say that it's usually death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it usually affects both your business and your IT group.
Yeah, that's super interesting for sure. Well, what a great conversation today. I loved everything that we chatted about.
Yeah, some good stuff. And I hope the audience learned a lot from it. Thanks for being here today and asking your questions along the way. And we read the chat. So thank you for dropping your questions and comments in the chat as well. New episodes of the show every Wednesday. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes, but otherwise we stream it every week. Same time, same place to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And be sure to check out the past episodes as well. So thanks for being here today, Darian. Thank you to Jeff for being our guest. Thanks to the audience. Thank you for watching and listening in. Hope to see you next week. Have a great week in the meantime. We'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.